All right, Zach Bush, how you doing?
Glad to be with you. I'm glad to be back to your audience here.
Thank you for joining us on our Go Beyond Summit. I'm Justin Franson with EMF Rocks and Athleticism.com, and obviously the infamous Dr. Zach Bush with his Ion Biome and many more companies and products that he's helping the world with right now. We are on Tuesday, April 7th, right?
That's it.
And you are in beautiful Hawaii right now. I'm in Southern California, Newport Beach. So thank you for going beyond with us.
Awesome. Glad to be with you guys.
You know, it's a really just a different environment right now with this whole coronavirus coming out and the pandemic and the fear that everyone is feeling from a lot of the media. And I just want to start with, we're going to go over a little bit of the virus, a little bit of how alarming it really is or should be for all of us. Talk about RF, the radio frequencies, how the 4-5G, all the small cell sites, the million satellites that are proposed to launch out now, how all that ties in with the ecosystem of the environment and our own gut health, and obviously and how you play a role with your farming and your product. So can you start, Dr. Zach, with jumping in on the actual virus? Tell us a little bit about this the self-limiting virus, and let's get a real story on an actual virus and understanding the biology of it, how it's made up, so we don't really have to fear it as much.
Very good. Yeah. So we started creating these viral pandemics around 1976 through the methodology. The previous sporadic events were very rare. The Spanish flu in 1918 is one that everybody's been pointing to over this pandemic. It's often the one that kind of the benchmark for horror of pandemics. It killed around 35 to 50 million people over a single year, and that was in a time when the global population was a fraction of today's population. So it was a massive pandemic and killed exponentially more people than we lost in World War I. And so it was really devastating pandemic that everybody points back to. But you can see how rare those events remain. Very, very unusual to have a sporadic virus do that. Then in 1976, we started seeing cross-species infections happen all the time. And so now every 3 to 5 years, we have another pandemic that we're able to categorize. But the fact is they're happening, all the time. Annually, we're seeing, sporadic viruses crop up and affect the world. And so typically these are affecting the world at a small enough number, or we don't bother with media attention, because even this current virus we're in will ultimately kill fewer people than our annual influenza epidemic that we have every year will kill, probably by 10 or 100 fold. So we're going to lose very few people ultimately to this virus. And I want everybody to be aware that we're creating these things through ecological pressures that really started in the mid 1970s, and they're accelerating. So that seems to correlate very nicely in time down to the very year that these shifts started to happen, when we started with broadcasting antibiotics into our food system. And that happened with the debut of Roundup in 1974. And so as we introduced that, 1976, it went global. In 1976, we saw the first shift from avian flu into human flu, and swine the same year as well. Actually, it was swine flu that made the news that year, but avian jumped at the same time. So you see the 1976 swine flu was the first where we see crossing of species of the typical influenza strains. And so that was interesting, mark, but then you see it accelerate 1996, 2001, 2002, in that era of genetically modified crops, where we started to be able to spray more and more foods directly with Roundup. It started in 1992 with a non-GMO, which was wheat. We started spraying wheat to dry it faster. And so that was the first time, 1992, that we started eating antibiotics in a large amount in our food. These antibiotics also have direct toxicity to the human immune system. Namely, it breaks apart vascular systems and gut wall through disruption of the tight junctions. That becomes very important when we talk about this new viral strain of COVID, is that we're seeing a new type of pathology that's killing the few people that are dying from this, are dying from a new mechanism. We've never seen people die from a virus from hypoxemia without pneumonia. And so these are not acting like the acute respiratory distress syndrome or ARDS that we see with end-stage, fulminant viral infections. And so they look much different than that. They behave much different on a ventilator. They're doing, a lot different physiology than we've seen before. And it's much more consistent with this chemical injury that we see with the agricultural system. So it's fascinating to see, what we've done to adapt the ecosystem through our large-scale chemical agriculture to damage the terrain of the microbiology of the planet. And as a result, that stress microbiology starts to adapt. And there's two ways that we see that adaptation. One is through drift. That's a genetic situation where you have slight changes in the genomics of a virus over year-to-year periods. That's what happens with influenza. H3N2, which is the typical human viral strain, changes year to year, and they're always rushing to figure out what the new variant is, and then they try to make a vaccine every year, and it's useless every year because we're behind the 8 ball by the time the thing ever gets out of the park. But we also have the situation where we've never been able to prove that the influenza vaccine actually prevents infection. What it seems to do it in a very small segment, year to year, it varies. People over the age of 75 with cardiovascular disease and asthma will have reduced symptoms or reduced risk of death if they got the flu vaccine, but they still got the flu. And so it doesn't actually act as a vaccine would in your brain, which means, well, I'm safe from the flu. No, you're not at all safe from the flu. You're going to get the flu no matter you get the vaccine or not. If you're lucky and you fit into these one small categories, which are typically males over the age of 45 to 65 is the typical category, but occasionally it'll be males over 75. But there will be some strange little category that they can dial down on the statistics to get some statistically significant results. Say, well, it helped this little population, and then they get approval for their next vaccine. So, by and large, these vaccines don't expect to prevent viral transmission because, in fact, that's not really how viruses work. They don't. We don't put out this bubble of antibodies to protect us from an incoming virus. Instead, the antibodies that we mount to a viral experience is that when that DNA and RNA gets inserted into a human cell, we start generating that content. A virus has no way to replicate, it has no way to repair itself, it has no way to generate energy. And so it's just a floating dead piece of RNA or DNA, typically RNA, and that RNA strand will float around, and then if it touches and binds to the surface of the human cell, it can get absorbed and then injected into the human genome, and the human will then produce that virus. Obviously, at that point, the immune system is not protecting you from the virus. The immune system has to now find human cells that are making that viral content and try to reduce the productivity of that protein that we would call a virus. And so that's a roundabout and broad brushstrokes, but suffice it to say, our age-old germ theory that was really based on bacterial infection doesn't apply to viruses, and therefore vaccines will never apply to viruses as they do to bacteria.
And then same with the contagions of it, wearing the masks and social distancing.
Yeah, so there's no data that masks or hand washing actually reduce transmission at this point. This is, a lot of presumption on age-old germ theory. And I understand why that is there. I understand why hospitals have to mandate this. I understand that all this is, but the data coming out on COVID is actually very reassuring. That, in South Korea, there was, and in Hong Kong, out of the Chinese data, there was 2 hospitals that were tracking it closely, and they showed that there was not a single measurable case of hospital-acquired COVID, meaning that there was not a single worker or a patient that actually received the virus in the hospital setting, which is kind of amazing because they're the sickest people that we see with this virus being put into a closed environment and treated in close quarters, and nobody gets sick. That's very unusual. And so it suggests, again, that there's an environmental influence. There's an environmental presence of this genetic information that we call the virus. That genetic information is in the environment and is more likely to be carried through environmental factors that we don't understand. They did catch, some of the RNA in some of the filters of the hospital air ducts in one of the studies, suggesting that maybe some of the RNA does get airborne and can be transmitted through the air. but nobody's been able to show that, it can pass from one person to the next via those droplets. And so we still are very unclear, as we are with all viruses, as how they actually passage, and every virus is probably unique. Even this one initially was everybody needs masks, and then maybe 10 days ago you hear, well, actually the masks aren't it. You have to wash your hands. It's mostly being passed by hand touching, and then you touch your face, and then you get that. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in the way that you think about how this virus is binding to pulmonary vasculature, but that's what we're told. So then we do that, and everybody's thinking it's face touching and hand washing, and we see all the signs change at the grocery store. So basically what's happening is we have very fragmented science right now as to what this virus actually is. We know it's an RNA virus. At least we've now identified an RNA virus. We still have not been able to show that the presence of this RNA in the bloodstream where somebody actually causes the syndrome that people are dying from. There's a correlation right now, but not necessarily causation. Again, it's a fascinating strand of RNA because we've never seen it before. There's a couple of proteins that are seen in other viruses, but there's one protein in particular that's brand new. And I just get so fascinated by this. And again, it needs to challenge our concept of infection here, in that bacteria can cause an overgrowth and they can, do their thing and cause infection. But a virus is literally just a genetic transfer. And that genetic transfer can shift human biology such that it can kill us if our physiology is weak and not prepared for it. But if we have a resilient, normal microbiome and a strong immune system, it's a genetic upload. It's not an attack at all. And COVID is very clear with this. Even with our current testing, which we'll get into in a minute because it's completely inaccurate. Everything that you hear about, number of cases, number of deaths with COVID, completely scientifically non-based, because the test we're using is a nucleotide testing called PCR, where we're measuring the amount of RNA in the bloodstream at that moment. It tells you nothing about whether the person's been exposed in the past and cleared that infection already or not. Those tests are just going out in the last couple of days. The very first serologic testing is happening now. But everything that's been in the news for 2.5 months and has shut down the global economy is completely false science. You cannot say how many people have seen this virus with a nucleotide PCR test, which is being used right now. The only thing you can say with that test is, I have a patient in the hospital right now who's sick, and I can see whether or not that virus is active in their bloodstream right now. But that's the only place that test should be used and put out there in the news. So what we could say is there's 6,000 people or 12,000 people around the world, or 25,000 people around the world, whatever the number ends up being. You got 100,000 people that are in the hospital, in ICUs right now, who have this virus evident in their bloodstream right now. That's the only thing that we should be concluding. Is the only thing that the news should be saying. Nobody should be saying that this has a death rate 4 times that or 10 times that of flu, which has been put out by, of course, the head of the CDC, the head of, the Department of Homeland Security and Infectious Disease, all this, these guys are literally lying to the media every day. And I don't understand why. They seem to be told that they have to create fear to get a public response, is the only thing that I can imagine. But they're literally lying. They have to know they're lying, because this is very much just like immunology 101. This is, basic science 101. There is no scientist that should be thinking that they can create population statistics out of a PCR kit. And yet we've been doing it since day one of this phenomenon. We haven't done this in the past, by the way. So I think it's very telling that this pandemic, in the way in which it's been treated by the science and media and political environment, is different than any other time. So for some reason, we're manipulating the data. We're using data unscientifically to a degree that we've never seen before. And I don't know why we're doing that. I don't know to what agenda or to what end. And in some ways, it's irrelevant for this conversation. The point being is, we don't know what the meaning of the virus is. We don't know what this new protein is. It's very likely that in all of these patients, probably 80% or more that are asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic with this thing, they're getting a genetic upgrade. There's now RNA that gets transcribed in their genes and now has genetic information within them, that they're now making new protein that the human body has never had access to. And so does that detox our body in some special way? Does it help, support an anti-cancer effort in the face of toxicity? We have no idea. Does it actually cause harm in the long run? We have no idea. And so we have a situation where we have a relatively benign virus that seems to hit a very small segment of the population with a very specific predilection or vulnerability. And that gets us to, who's dying with this. But before I run my mouth anymore, I stop and let you redirect me.
Yeah, definitely. No, thank you for that. That's such great insight on it. Now, as far as the alarming side, I think a lot of people are testing that the malaria drug. Let's talk about the drugs first. The malaria drug and Z-Pak, malaria drug, zinc. Those are like straight up solutions. And then, is that right from what we're seeing?
Not from what we're seeing in New York. So, there's some good data coming out of the ICUs in New York is that this is not behaving like community-acquired pneumonia, which is what everybody, immediately started treating it. My brother is up in Chicago and being given the same regimen for the infectious disease department up there at his clinics, which is, azithromycin, which is the classic Z-Pak, to treat community-acquired pneumonia. We've known for centuries, it feels like, but at least the last 80 years, we've known that antibiotics do not kill viruses. It's impossible. It's totally different biology. So we are proposing a malaria drug and a pneumonia drug for this. It is irrational to think that the antibiotic properties of those two drugs are going to have any influence on this virus itself. Wow. What is likely happening, if there is any therapeutic benefit, which I very much radically would refuse to believe right now, because I think the chance of killing somebody a week later or 10 days later from a Z-Pak is really high, because if you kill the microbiome right when the microbiome diversity is most needed to adapt to this new biologic effect of a virus, you need bacteria at that moment. You need fungi at that moment. So when you disrupt with an antibiotic, I get very nervous that, they might look better in the first 5 days and then they crump. And so I'm very nervous about putting an antibiotic on somebody who has no signs of pneumonia. And again, the chest x-rays do not look like pneumonia in these cases, what we're hearing. And so it doesn't look like ARDS, which is a whiteout of the lungs. It doesn't look like that. And so we need to be very cautious that we are being told to treat this just like SARS, just like, all these other MERS, all the other coronaviruses. Remember, coronavirus has been responsible for these pandemics multiple times before. This one is different, and it intrigues me. This new protein that's in this RNA strand is making it behave differently. And so the news that we're getting is these people actually have hypoxemia, not respiratory failure. They're not having a hard time moving air. They're having a hard time actually getting the oxygen to release from the hemoglobin or bind to the hemoglobin. And interestingly, we know some very specific toxins that do that. And the one mentioned earlier is a classic. Roundup causes hypoxemia at the tissue level. And so is it possible that this virus is actually unmasking Roundup toxicity or glyphosate poisoning in these few patients? And it's again telling because of who's dying. So the people that are dying from this are not people with emphysema or asthma or the lung conditions. The people that are dying from this are people with vascular disease. They are cardiovascular, cerebrovascular, stroke, and chronic kidney disease. Those three are your top three chronic diseases that are dying from this condition. Well, the hallmark between all three of those is endothelial dysfunction or breakage of the tight junctions between the epithelial cells or endothelial cells of the vascular system. And what does that is Roundup. And so again and again, we can come back almost through any angle and find out that the people are dying are the ones that are most likely have Roundup injury. The method by which they're dying is exactly how Roundup causes tissue damage. And so is it related to that? I don't know, but we started making these COVID viruses. We started making coronavirus variants as soon as we put this into the feed of poultry and swine in China and elsewhere. And we started forcing these biologic shifts to happen. And so those creatures are making an adaptive change. They are creating new proteins, putting them out in protein envelopes and sending them out. We call that a virus, but in fact, it's a genetic upload into the environment to say, I'm a stressed out organism, I'm having this new acute injury, here's my information. That information then goes out, we call it a pandemic, but in fact, it's genetic information in response to a very specific injury. And now that information gets into the population, and most people are great. So is it possible that we just upgraded 50%, 80% of the population with absolutely no harm, and they now have genetic information where they can make a new protein that keeps them from toxicity Roundup? I have no idea. Or are we going to find out that those people are now going to have dietary symptoms of leaky gut and gluten sensitivity, and is this actually predisposing them to, or unmasking the Roundup toxicity in their food system. We don't know yet. All of those are likely, all of those are possible. We'll have to see things tease out. But I think when we get to serologic testing, I think it's going to be embarrassing for the entire public if this information is let out, because the numbers that we currently have are going to be radically wrong. Like, I don't know what they're going to be, but I can tell you they are radically different than any of the public health numbers we're seeing on this virus right now.
Wow. So if a vascular, so a lot of the more natural approaches I use for flushing are actually cardiovascular stuff. Foot baths are great for it. Ozone is really helpful. There's so many. Carbon C60 helps flush some radiation. There's so many different ways that you can. Their molecular hydrogen is a big one for the body. Yeah. So those are some of mine. Do you have a few ideas for people?
Yeah, mine is extremely biased though. So, for the last 8 years, even in the last couple of weeks, I've been blamed on using this current pandemic to my own advantage to sell my product. And the whole point is, no, I've been saying for 8 years that this pandemic's going to happen, and I'm showing you how it's going to happen. And then when it happens, then I get blamed for taking advantage of it. It's like, no, I'm trying to prevent this freaking thing from happening. And so the whole thing that we've been doing is getting out the science on how the microbiome communicates. And so Ion is a whole product line now, started with Restore, and we rebranded last year. And the Ion line has a sinus product and a gut health product that changes the way that the microbiome communicates. It is the communication network between bacteria, fungi, and the mitochondria inside your cells. And it reverses that Roundup injury that we're prone to, not by the product, but by the human cell's ability to repair that. And so it's by being the communication network between the cells, it allows the cells to inform one another what needs to be repaired and how. And so you see the human cells kick into action in concert with the mitochondria within them to do these very rapid repair functions. And so we see radical improvement in microbial biodiversity, microbial intelligence across the gut membrane integrity. Leaky gut goes to non-leaky gut because the human cells are now making tons of tight junction proteins to bind them all together. Same thing happens with the blood-brain barrier, kidney tubules, everywhere you would want pulmonary vasculature. All of these, cascades are happening as the endothelial cells within the vascular tree and the epithelial cells of the gut bind themselves back together into coherent membrane protectors. This is what we've been doing for 8 years. It's, you see it over and over again every day in the laboratory, and it works. And so if you were going to pick like something at the root cause solution of what's going on with not corona, it's just like any microbial instability, you're going to reach for Ion. So Ion is that daily reinforcement of the terrain. You're putting in this information stream that's going to balance the terrain of the gut and its relationship to the gut wall, the vascular wall, the blood-brain barrier, the kidney tubule, on down the line. And so you're balancing that ecosystem out. So ionbiome.com, there are tons of science white papers, published peer-reviewed journal papers, all of that. All the money that we make from that company gets funneled back into our nonprofit and other R&D companies to create new solutions for the planet. So our nonprofit is Farmers Footprint was our first project within it, and Farmers Footprint is there teaching chemical farmers how to transition to regenerative organic methodologies, eliminating Roundup and glyphosate to really fix the root cause of the problem that's killing humanity right now. So when you support Ion, you're going directly to those farmers as you build the terrain of your household. You're helping those farmers change the terrain of the planet. And so it's a really exciting way for you to participate in a global revolution. And then if you want to reach out to farmersfootprint.us, you see the 20-minute documentary film that we released this past year, and take a look at that. It's the beginning of a long series of films that we're doing on the storytelling of farmers who are taking radically courageous steps to step out of the pharmaceutical mandate of the chemical industry and practice real soil management. And they get damned immediately, and they are in great danger when they make that shift. And so they desperately need community around them. And so we didn't know we were going to go build that nonprofit like we did. We thought we were going to just teach people about Roundup. What we're trying to do is teach people about the crisis of the farmer right now. 8,000 farms a year, and what's currently happening is going to put even further pressure on that. But 8,000 farms a year going out of business just in the United States alone. Globally, it's a complete disaster. Suicide rates have never been so high in farmers. The dairy industry being a great example of this. Dairy prices are so abysmal since the Trump administration went into these trade wars globally. And so our exports for milk went to zero, and we saw crashing prices, so much so that the American Dairy Co-op is now sending out with each paycheck to their farmers the suicide hotline, because suicide's gotten so intense with the collapse of the income. So it's just desperate times, and I think all of you, I hope, are realizing how sensitive and vulnerable your food system is. Supply chains are not healthy right now. Supply chains are extremely vulnerable. If you're waiting for ships and supply line from Chile for all of your winter goods, it is very easy to disrupt that supply chain as a pandemic happens or as big global events occur. So it is in your best solution as a family to get closer to your farmers. And so Farmers Footprint can help identify where are those regen farmers in your area, to get CSAs going, to get touching your farmer, and bring hope to those farmers as well, and tell them that you care, that this is a highly valued commodity for you and your family. There's nothing more important than your food system. And so that's where I hope this pandemic really wakes us up to reality. So you can participate in all those projects through those websites.
Awesome. I love it. Well, since you're on Hawaii, I know one of my old clients is a pro surfer named Justin Barca. He created a documentary movie, Aloha, AINA Warrior, where he really went against the whole GMO on Kauai. And I mean, this is such a big topic, because when you make the environment healthy and the soil healthy, then it transfers into us. And one of the things you told me, it's like, hey, Justin, we get this ion biome from the soil. The plants get their nutrients from the soil. We're just going direct to the soil for this. And so it's just ends up being such a powerful, powerful solution for replenishing your gut and your overall health and your biome of the body.
That's exactly right. And Kauai is an interesting island in that it's, the government was allowed to move in all of its unregulated herbicides and pesticides and R&D into Kauai and Oahu here. And so, ironically, we're seeing the highest levels of, untested carcinogens and everything else being put onto these food systems right adjacent to schoolyards. One of the great films made on this was done by, I think it's Richard Branson and his wife, if I remember right, but I could be wrong on that. But I am wrong on that. I'm now blanking on the person who made it. Anyway, it's called Poisoning Paradise is the name of the film. And Pierce Brosnan and his wife. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I loved your Farmer's Footprint. The clips that you made from that were just phenomenal, and it covers so much. So obviously, one last topic before we end this, because I know we're doing a quick one with you, is the 5G and the radio frequencies, and how does that all tie into this and our energy systems, and how different really is it compared to how we rev?
Yeah, there's been one of my colleagues, Tom Cohen, has put out some information on that, and so is Sasha Stone, and who's not a scientist at all. He's a filmmaker, but an environmentalist, and so there's been a lot of stuff online. The reality is that doesn't really fit with the population, neither the biology of how viruses adapt or why, and it doesn't really fit with the population patterns that we're seeing. I think that, so I don't think 5G is causing coronavirus to occur. I believe that what is likely is that, the radiation that we see from a 5G source is definitely in the bandwidth of the human immune system. And so I can see the opportunity for this to affect the human immune response to a threat. And so I would be very interested to see the people that are dying in New York right now, what blocks do they hail from? Because 5G is very new in New York. There's only a few, it's less than 10% of the blocks in New York actually have 5G happening. And so I think it'd be very interesting to see those population statistics as they start making them public. But, bizarrely, the data has been held so tightly by regulatory agencies right now. Like, they're not letting us see any of the details on the few deaths that happened from those cruise ships. Almost nobody died on those cruise ships, by the way. That should have been our petri dish to show us this is not going to be, some 10 times the flu virus. So we had a perfect petri dish at the population level, at the public health level, to say this looks like a pretty benign virus compared to many others that we've seen in the past. Doesn't mean we should ignore it, but we should have made public health decisions based on that experience. But we weren't allowed to, as a science community, to see any of that data. So, everything's being kind of kept behind locked doors right now as far as where who knows what and what data is being shared with the public. But I think that 5G will be an interesting thing for us to figure out later. But right now, it's way premature to suggest that 5G is somehow influencing the outcomes. It's quite possible. We know that 5G radiation can disrupt immune function. We know that 5G can disrupt oxygen transport and things like this. So some of the things are fitting and correlating well there. But again, it's not like, Roundup, where we know it's in our food system, it's in our water, it's in the air we breathe, it's in the rainfall at very well measured, rates now. It's because we've been following it for 30 years. So we know that science really well.
Yeah.
What we don't know yet is, with the very small amount of 5G that's available in these, environments, northern Italy does have a little bit of 5G, but again, it's a tiny amount compared to the population that was exposed. So we need to find out where the pockets of people most effective in 5G areas, were they not? Is there 5G in the hospitals that are seeing the highest mortality? We don't know. There's such simple solutions to this, right? And so I recommend to any healthcare provider listening to this, if you are involved in hospital care, you will put a grounding sheet on that bed. And as soon as the skin touches the grounding source, it becomes a Faraday cage. So you just need to ground the skin of the patient. They'll become a Faraday cage. You've got a product right there to do it. So ground the patient, put something in that environment that's so cheap and simple to do. And then you've at least checked that off your list of, is this contributing or not?
Definitely. I love that. And who knows, we both know that both glyphosate and obviously any of the radio frequencies are huge biostressors and environmental toxins and neurotoxins for that matter. And it's a lot of the studies that I've seen, they're really going just a whole nother direction with just when it's amplified, it's all cardiovascular challenges with 5G for sure. So, and that's what you're saying is a lot of this too. And so, yeah, our EMF Rocks grounding bag is a massive solution that we sell at doctor clinics all around for grounding that area and repelling it. Helps facilitate your recharging your body that gets decharged from it. So there's so many of these components, and I just love looking at the whole puzzle with you and saying, hey, look, we're getting bombarded. We have to wake up and make this shift just globally. And it all starts with our purchase power and with the farming and really having supplements like yours and products like this that can help protect you and rebuild your life force and your gut microbiome and the health of your body so you can fend off a self-limiting virus. And we don't have to go to these extremes because our body is designed to actually flush these really well once we support it with mechanisms to help flush it.
Excellent. Yep. We can be a healthy world again. So I'm excited to see us all move and wake up, and the rise of consciousness is right at hand. We can do this thing. So let's all take a look at our own lifestyles and understand how we're contributing to a consumptive species and change that behavior and become a co-creative force for a healthier future. And the way you can do that most of all, I would argue, would be just start planting something in your backyard. If you'll kill everything you touch, then just plant mint. Mint grows like crazy. You can't kill it. It will take over your whole backyard, and you can make fresh mint tea all day long and keep, be a part of the microbiome again. You can reverse climate change that way. You can reverse chronic disease that way. So just grow something in your backyard. If you don't have a backyard, like I don't here, then we just started what we call the farmer's fingerprint garden on our lanai. So we just have a tiny little herb garden. We have some kale and beets and lettuce growing. So it's, it doesn't take more than a few square feet of sunshine to grow food. And it's amazing how abundant. Two of our meals yesterday had herbs and such off of our tiny little garden. So it doesn't take much to really start to contribute to a global recovery of food independence and food sovereignty in these small ways. So get engaged, get out there in nature, and soak it up.
Definitely. Thank you, Dr. Zach Bush. IamBiome.com, Farmer's Footprint. You guys check him out. We love it. You are brilliant. Thank you for helping facilitate informing us and saving the world and allowing everyone to be their own best healer. So we love you. Thank you so much. You're the best. We'll see you all soon.
Awesome. Thank you all for being on. Appreciate you having me.